Good morning, education advocates. Oops.
We're taking pictures for your whole table. Okay.
All right. Okay, in the matter of full disclosure, I need to say that I had to beg, I had to grovel, I had to do everything I could think of in order to introduce Pastor Charles Johnson, because I am his fangirl. Pastor Charles Johnson is a public, Charles Foster Johnson is a public education advocate from Texas, whom I actually just met him in the flesh. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. He's a pastor.
You can confess your sins, but don't confess mine.
Anyway, I met him in person just yesterday, but I feel like I've known him for forever because we have been talking on the phone constantly about trying to bring his movement of pastors for Texas education, or for Texas children, to Indiana. And Indiana, we have a lot of really religious people, but we're trying to bring them over to back education the way the folks in Texas have. Let me say a couple of words about Charlie Johnson before he comes to the microphone. He is the founder and co-pastor of Bread, which is a faith community in Fort Worth, Texas. And he has had congregations large and small all over Texas and all over other areas. Among the many things that he has done is he has spent 40 years in the ministry, and in 1977 he was working in DC on working with kids in the projects, and that was when he got his calling. He started the Pastors for Texas Children in 2013, and one of his greatest achievements, or the ones that he feels the most strongly about, is when he was inducted into the Martin Luther King Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. I was first introduced to him by Diane and Carol via email, and so we made contact, and we have been trying to we've been trying to get pastors involved in Indiana. We've been trying to get superintendents involved, but we have a pretty hard-headed group in Indiana. And in fact, the only ones that seem to be relatively liberal in Indiana are all at this table. So. Anyway, Charlie is an amazing guy, and regardless of what your religious or non-religious persuasion is, you will be following him and stalking him just as I have been. With no further ado, here's Charlie Johnson.
Phyllis, how completely wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. Come on, sister. You can talk the whole time, Phyllis.
I forgot to tell you what I did. A Sarah Palin thing and wrote a note on my hand so I would remember, and then I forgot it. Diane told me to tell you that he is our secret weapon for getting people involved through preachers and teachers. So without further ado.
Wow. Friends, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you. It's been such a terrific conference, so full of information and inspiration. And lest I say nothing else that might be memorable and helpful for you, we've got 500 advocates loaded for bear. And I guess come on, put your hands together. Absolutely. Come on. And I guess after Secretary DeVos's testimony, that's a pretty apt thing to say. All right, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Find 3 people you hadn't met yet and say, if we were in church, we'd say peace to you. If you want to say that, peace to you, that'd be fine. 3 people you hadn't met, or good morning. Peace to you. Peace to you. All right, thank you very much. All right. I thought teachers were compliant. This is a crowd of rebellious people. That's good. That's good. That's a good quality. All right, thank you. I like that. I like that. I think that greeting and fellowship helps us all. We need that. Y'all, we've got enough power in this very room to turn this great nation back to public education for all children. Now, I'm neither a prophet nor a son of a prophet, but I'm going to prophesy that the activists and the advocates in this room, by the way, you're so committed, dedicated to this cause. There are more people here this morning than yesterday. Nobody has left. Nobody has gone home. That's amazing for a conference. You bet. Absolutely. And we're up to, well, here's my message. We are up to the goodness of God in this world. Now, we don't want you to put it that way. We have people in this room of faith traditions and people in this room of no faith traditions. And we're unified by one thing, and that is the social justice provision of quality education for all children. Not just for children who can afford it, all children. Now, every faith tradition, I would dare to say that we have beautiful faith leaders in this room. Axiomatically, a local teacher, educator is also a leader in a community of faith. Pastors and rabbis and imams know when we need something done in our faith community, who do we go to get it done? We go to a public school educator. They're the ones who are leading our Bible classes, scripture classes. They're the ones who are doing our children's ministry and youth ministry. You are natural organizers. There is something intrinsically spiritual about education. It's the reason you went into the field. God knows you didn't go into education for the money. Do I hear an amen? So you have something in common with preachers and ministers and faith leaders. And we're working on the premise that when we get every faith community in this country, every faith community, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, of every denomination, and all those wonderful faith traditions have different subgroupings called denominations. But when we get every religious institution connected to every single public school, we will have a culture change in America. And that's what I want to visit with you about. Let me say at the outset, we are coming into your schools with these open and this closed. So our purpose is to help your schools in ways consistent with our American civil liberties tradition of religious liberty and separation of church and state. Now, whether you are a Baptist or a Jew or a Muslim or a secular humanist or an atheist, we build up the community for the good of all people in the community. We referenced philosopher Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative yesterday. We cannot will for ourselves or our children that which we're not willing to intend for everybody else in the community. And so the privatization of the public trust, I'm using some synonyms here today, friends. You'll have to do your own translation. This is what you have to do anytime you're listening to a preacher anyway. God's common good is the same thing as a public trust. It is a trust. We don't debate in our communities whether or not everybody in the city, at least we haven't yet begun debating it, whether or not everybody in the community deserves police protection. Do I get to back out my taxes or get a voucher from the local government because I have my own private security guard? Do I get to back out the investment I make in the recreation of Fort Worth because I might have my own personal swimming pool? Do I get a voucher from everybody else in the community for that pool? Look, every time I hear a Tea Party person, I go up to them and say, brother, if you don't believe in the public trust, leave your car parked in the parking lot and don't drive home on a road paid for by all the people in this community. Water, roads, police, fire, health, education. We're debating some of those in this moral confusion we have in our country today. But all of those are provisions of God's common good. We need to recover what a tax is. A tax is an investment in the public good of every citizen of the community. Every faith tradition affirms what I'm saying. I've just said some powerful sentences that are speaking inspiration into our hearts, hopefully and prayerfully. I hear those sentences, whether in private conversation or in a plenary session like this, and I'm lifted up. I'm challenged. My spirit is lifted. Inspiration, the word means the Spirit is injected, inspirited. It's the reason we came to this conference. Now, your tradition may use words different from my tradition, but follow me on this. In the Hebrew scriptural tradition, there is an old story. When God created the human, God put the human where? In a garden. Because if you're on God's planet, you get to eat. There's not a debate about that. The first commandment of God is to be, according to the Hebrew scriptures, to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it. You may eat, the scripture says in the book of Genesis, chapter 2. And I'll never, for as long as I'm drawing my breath, forget a story that was told me not long ago by an educator in Houston. A little boy showed up a few minutes late for the free and reduced breakfast that day. He realized he was late and he immediately began to sob. And his teacher, his second grade teacher, pulled him up close and said, "Sweetheart, it's okay, it's okay." And he looked up, tears streaming down his face, and he said, "No, ma'am, it's not okay. I am so hungry. Last night was my night to skip supper. Makes me want to throw things." In this country, the only place many of our children get a nutritious and adequate meal is at your school. You are providing God's common good. Cannot believe that we want to compromise that. You skip down later in that wonderful passage in the book of Genesis. Of all the goodness of creation, there is one thing that is not good. It is not good for the human to be alone. The ancient teachers realized that. We realize it to this day. And so God creates another human, brings that human, those two humans together, because if you're on God's planet, you deserve to be loved. Everybody gets to be loved. And in the middle of that wonderful ancient myth, God brought all the animals to the human to see what the human would name them. And the human gave names to all the animals, just like my little granddaughter Nora is doing right now at age 3. She's doing the same thing Adam did in the ancient story at the dawn of time. I know that creature, cow, mama, tree, round spherical object, ball, putting those words together, almost 3 years old, in that mysterious juxtaposition of guttural phonetical sounds called language. This is what you do with every child every day, regardless of grade level, regardless of your subject matter. You are recapitulating the most important story. You're helping the human name his or her world. Thanks be to God for you. My goodness, it's God's work. It is God's will. Let's go to another faith tradition. What is the only story that we have in the Gospels out of the childhood of Jesus the Christ, whom we confess as Christians as the Christ? Anybody ever thought about it? Seated at the feet of his teachers, listening to them, asking them questions. The only story that the gospel writers deemed fit to put in the record is Jesus in an educational moment. And he tells his mama, I must be about my Father's business. What is my Father's business but to name this wonderful, mysterious world? Every human being needs it in order to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. You wouldn't put it that way. You're not a preacher. Thank God for that. But this is what education is all about. In the Muslim tradition, while the Christians were still stumbling around in the darkness in Europe, Muslim communities were making huge scientific and mathematical advances. You know this from your study of Western civilization. Education is a provision of God for all people. So, I was minding my own business at Broadway Baptist Church. By the way, I was Alice Walton's pastor in Broadway Baptist Church. Now you know what a pathetic minister I am. And I was minding my own business, and I got a call from the Baptist General Convention of Texas, our Texas denomination, asking me if I would represent the denomination in public education for all the reasons I've just outlined over the last few minutes. Well, most ministers and rabbis and imams want to serve their traditions. I said yes. This was in 2008. I had just been inducted into the Martin Luther King Board of Preachers at Morehouse College, where I made an oath before God to carry on and sustain Dr. King's tradition of social justice in this country. How could I say no to a call to support public education? I did not know anything about public education. But I said yes. I went down to Austin, and holy guacamole. That's when I first, in 2008, learned the insidious, well-funded, well-heeled attack on our neighborhood and community schools. I was convicted. I was shocked. I could not believe it. I remember driving to downtown Dallas and sitting down with Randall Everett. I said, "Hey, Randall, we got a problem. We've got a problem. We've got state legislators in this great state of Texas that do not believe in public education for all Texas children. We've got a problem. We've got to wake up our communities to this. My goodness, they're trying to cram down our throats all kinds of ridiculous instruments to privatize this public trust, this testing." I remember telling him, "We got a testing racket in Texas." My Lord, it's a racket. It's a corruption. Oh my God. We've got these companies out of, Texans love to rag on New Yorkers and Californians, so I said, we've got these testing companies out of New York and California that are coming in here making $1 bazillion off our schools and off our kids. I can't believe this. We got to do something about it. We did do something about it. Pastors for Texas Children led in Senate Bill 4 last session, and we reduced 16 high-stakes testing down to 4. That's 4 too many. That's 4 too many. 4 too many. We want to turn that classroom back over to you because our children need you. Now look, I'm old. I was born before the earth cooled. You know how many tests I took? Honest to Pete, you know how many tests I took in public schools? 1. It was called the ACT. And I took it in the 11th grade. I don't remember taking any other test. And now it's all our children do. It's a violation of the human spirit. It is a violation of God's spirit. It is a violation of the basic fundamental provision of God to name God's world. Randall said he had his plate full already, and Dr. Everett said, "Well, Charlie, see what you can do about it." And I did see what I could do about it, and I became involved, and I started going to your colleagues in Texas and getting educated about issues pertaining to public education. And then in 2011, Texas cut $5.4 billion out of our state budget for public education. We were already somewhere, Patty, you're in the room, we already ranked somewhere around 46th or 47th in the nation. Patty, where are you? Am I right about that? Yeah, somewhere down there. In 2013, we only restored $3.4 billion of that $5.4 billion we had cut. And the first thing the lieutenant governor, who does not believe in public education, we have a lieutenant governor presiding over 31 members of the Texas Senate that does not believe in public education as the foundation of our social order. He went all over the state and said all of the cuts have been restored. You are looking at the person that called out that lie. He did not like it, but we did it. In the Houston Chronicle and the Austin American-Statesman and the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and all the dailies in Texas, because we know how to make a ruckus. We're preachers. And we'd call a press conference and we'd get up and we'd say the lieutenant governor is lying. He's lying. They did not restore all of the cuts to public education, and we've got a systemic deficit of somewhere around $6 to $8 billion. Friends, John Adams said in 1785, we'll start there. Let there be not one square mile without a school in it, not paid for by the generosity of a charitable individual. Professor Williams knows this, he teaches it. But by the public, at the public's expense. The legislature, the state constitution of the state of Texas, Article 7, Section 1, that all 181 legislators in the Texas legislature place their hand on a family Bible. The Bible is an important book in Texas. We manipulate it every chance we can get. Lay their hands on a family Bible and swear before God to uphold, defend, and protect the Constitution of the state of Texas. Article 7, Section 1 of which reads, a general diffusion of knowledge. Even Sam Houston got that, and most of his colleagues were virtually illiterate. A general diffusion of knowledge being essential, not parenthetical, it's the essence of our social order. Essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people. The legislature of this state shall make suitable provision for the operation and maintenance of public free schools. Say those three words with me. Public free schools. Louder. Public free schools. Those legislators do not like us rubbing the Constitution or the Bible in their nose. But that is what catapulted our organization. Then Louis Malfaro said, Charlie, he handed me a book. The title of it was Reign of Error. He said, I read there's a quote by you in the Austin paper. You need to read this book. It's written by a woman named Diane Ravitch. I didn't know anything about public education. I didn't know. All I knew was what Dan Patrick had done in the state legislature, Diane. All I knew is something's going on here. Why is this man acting so bad? I read Diane's book, said this last year at the conference in Raleigh. And then I proceeded to order a box load. I called up our team, about 24 ministers, and I said, read this book now. Read it now. My phone started ringing. We got emails buzzing, conversations going. And we started in the summer of 2013, Pastors for Texas Children, mobilizing faith communities in Texas for public education support and advocacy. And I'm going to tell you what those two things mean for us in just a moment. Everybody in the room can recapitulate all of these issues in brilliant detail better than me. I certainly don't think that's my charge today. I think my charge today is to beg you, educators, I beseech you, by the mercy of God, get your community involved in your public school. You are powerful. You are beautiful. You have massive authority for your community. I know you don't feel that way. There is a huge, insidious disconnect between your level of esteem and the community's attitude toward you. And we exist, our very purpose is to bridge that gap. And so we're cultivating community support for public education through the local faith community. Who better than a person who brokers spiritual values to come alongside you? And we do it in this way. Jesus had a very insightful organizing strategy. You've never heard it. I had never heard of it until Dr. Albert Reyes pointed it out to me. It's the strategy that we follow. When he commissioned his disciples, forgive this parochial reference, but I think it'll speak to you. When Jesus commissioned his disciples, he said, go into the oikos, which is the Greek word for household. Oikos, oikonomai. We get our English word economy transliterated. It means household. It means God's common good. When you go into the household, find the person of peace, which means the leader, the authorized and recognized leader of that culture, and say, peace be upon you. And then the entire oikos will be open in relationship to you, because you have the endorsement and imprimatur of the person of peace. We stumbled into it, but we have employed that strategy. So we have befriended all 1,000 plus, Mike, superintendents in the state of Texas. And guess what? 400 of them have said, yes, Pastor, I will convene the faith leaders of my community. You come in and present. And we deliver our message much like what we're delivering to you today. And every one of those pastors, it's rarely a gathering this size, almost never. It's more like 8 or 10 or 12 ministers, an occasional rabbi in the urban communities, and imams sitting around a ham sandwich in the fellowship hall of the church. We've had to apologize to rabbis over and over and over again. The rabbis, by the way, say, hey, we're pastors too. When it comes to public schools, we're pastors too. We're going to gather up the whole community for the public school. I love that. Rabbis have been endorsing education long before we ever came along. And every one of them at the end of the hour, the meetings last about an hour, and they say, what do you want me to do? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go call the principal of your local school, make an appointment with her, and submit to her authority. You will have to do this 4 or 5 times before she knows you mean business. Y'all know what I'm talking about. She's going to be protective of her children. She's going to think you want to come in and start preaching and praying. She's going to vet you thoroughly. She's not going to say yes in that first appointment. So you got to go back, and you got to go back. And about the second time, if you'd take a truckload of school supplies, it would sweeten the deal a little bit. And we start with school supplies. And then that relationship is formed, and we say, peace be upon you, principal. The most powerful question, how can we help? How can we help? When the minister does that with you about a half a dozen times, superintendent, you're going to know she means business. And she's going to pester you. We want to help. And then out of that ministry, we call it, in your world you would call it school assistants, we do advocacy. We call up the 150 House members and 31 Senate members and say, we want you're starving our neighborhood schools. We want you to fund our neighborhood schools properly, even as you swore before God you would do, and quit trying to make public profit-making machines out of our public schools. What that means is, let me tell you what that means. You're making commodities out of our kids and markets out of our classrooms, and we want it to stop right now. And so we've blocked a voucher bill in the reddest state in the union, not once, not twice, but 3 times. We blocked that ridiculous bathroom bill that the lieutenant governor was trying to cram down our throats. By the way, a wonderful Republican House member, Byron Cook. If you pray for Byron Cook. The Koch brothers are going to come after him with the wrath of God. Get this, teachers. Get how much money they're going to spend to defeat Byron Cook, a conservative. He's a Baptist deacon in the Southside Baptist Church of Corsicana. He's the single most powerful legislator in our legislature. He stopped the voucher bill. He's chair of something called the Public Affairs Committee. He stopped the bathroom bill. He said, Pastor, what are we doing scapegoating these kids? It's wrong. It's sinful. It's wrong. They're going to spend $5 million in his house seat to defeat him. They hate him. They hate him. He has shown me messages that he's received out of those far radical right-wingers out of Houston. Houston is the hotbed, Diane. Where you grew up is the hotbed. You didn't do much good, Diane. What happened? Good grief. You left too early. You had to leave. So we were able to stop. Our mantra was classrooms, not bathrooms. Don't you love that? Classrooms, not bathrooms. So ministry and advocacy, they go together. You cannot do the advocacy. You can do it. You have the authority to do it. You have that authority. You have that integrity. You call up your state legislator, he's going to listen to you. He's going to listen to you when you take your pastor with you. Everybody pick up this sheet, please. It's on your table. And I've got some left. Please, please, please take this home to your faith leader. Please, please, please. If you're on Twitter, we're at Pastors #4 TX Kids. It's on the bottom of that sheet. Follow us. It's an action step. Please follow us. And let's get this network of ministers going in every one of those red states. Phyllis, we're coming to Indiana. Enough power at this table to get it going in Indiana. Right here. So preachers and teachers, it's a dynamic duo protecting and preserving the common good in every town. The local faith community and the local school. You're the vanguard. You're holding the line. And we can do this together. When I first started doing this work, give me just a moment, Colleen, if you would. I said, give me a list of the most recalcitrant and stubborn legislators. I'll go visit them. I'll change their mind. I'm a Baptist preacher. I've dealt with knuckleheaded deacons my whole career. I know how to convince a mind. So the first 4 or 5 visits went like this, my friends. I walked in. I said, my name is Charles Johnson. I'm here to talk about public education. You could hear the off button click when I said public education. I walked back to the rotunda. I sat down. Our rotunda has portraits of all the Texas state governors. Sat down underneath the portrait of Preston Smith, a wonderful governor from Lubbock. I had the privilege of knowing Governor Smith. We used to believe in the common good. Republicans, Democrats. Now we want to privatize it to make money for a few. It's wrong. It's sinful. I sat under that portrait and I had a little prayer session with the Lord. What on earth am I doing wrong, God? I'm one of your pastors. I'm not used to being ignored. If that were only true, but that's what I told God. And back to my spirit came this response. Son, you don't represent public education. What do you know about public education? Not a thing. That is a very, very important profession about which you know nothing. Go back in that senator's office and tell him who you represent. This is when Pastors for Texas Children was birthed in my spirit in 2011. I walked back in that room. I stood up a little taller. I hitched my tie up a little tighter, held my head a little higher. And I said, I'm Charles Johnson, and I'm pastor of the Broadway Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas, downtown. Up comes the head. Out from around the desk comes the young receptionist. Oh, Pastor, we're so glad you're here. Let me get you a cup of coffee. How about a bottle of water? Wait right there. Let me get the senator. He will want to speak with you. And that's when I knew we can turn this We can change this. We can make the public school, neighborhood and community public school, again, a place for all children. One last story and I'll sit down. Got to tell it. I got to leave it with you. It's an image. It's an enduring image and a powerful, creative image that will sustain you. My father died of neurological disease. He had Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Wonderful man. I come from a sixth-generation Alabama family. My granddaddy moved into South Alabama in 1810, cleared the land, a slave-holding family. Race is the dominant issue of my life. I grew up with stories at my supper table of all my granddaddies. I'm a Southerner in that narrative tradition, so I come by preaching honestly. Got to Texas as a young minister, single, married a Texas girl, wore out a pair of boots, and here I am. I'm a Texan. But after my father died, we were in my father's hunting cabin on the Alabama River where all of his granddaddies had worked the land for generations. My father spent so many of his days of leisure and recreation at that place. My brother said, "Fellas, come here." And the four of us, all boys, gathered in the kitchen. My brother had peeled back the tablecloth covering the wooden plank of the table, and there, carefully etched in that wooden table, were the names of all four of Francis Johnson's sons. Very carefully carved, exquisitely in fact. Langdon, Francis, Charles, Dennis, and at the head of the table, Daddy. My father, at the end of his life, could not remember my name. And I'd come home to see him, and he'd say, "Now, who are you?" And I'd say, "Daddy, I'm Charles." "Oh, Charles." Then 30 seconds later, "Now, who are you?" And the ritual all over again, you know. But my father etched his sons' names in that table because he wanted us to know long after he could tell us himself or even call our name that we always had a place at our Father's table. You wouldn't put it that way, but that's the message you are giving every child. You are somebody. You have a place. Go and claim that place. God love you. God keep you.